series, and today I will present a lecture about game audio, which is my favorite parts in games. So a little disclaimer, everything I will tell you, nothing of it is ultimate truth, it's just my viewpoint and my personal perspective. So let's start. I will present you this lecture in a nutshell now. What I'm gonna do is I will show you one piece of visual with two different audios, and we will examine how these two different soundtracks will completely change the meaning. I hope you get the idea. And now the second one. Yeah, so my point is here to show that meaning is completely altered. Doesn't matter what the exact meaning is. Does it mean to that the Simpsons actually are kind of dramatic cartoon or something more funny? It just shows that together visual and audible information can transfer and alter the experience, what we get. And by using different kind of soundtracks, we can accomplish the different kind of experience. It's basically same with visual demonstrated by Kuleshov in film theory. It's the experiment which shows two images. And for example, one is man eating, or no, one is man staring at something, second is meal. The meaning is man is hungry, but if we show, for example, a woman or something else, we interpret the man differently. And same goes with soundtracks. So this lecture is hopefully giving you some more insights, some practical knowledge, and new perspectives. Questions are welcome. Taking notes are also welcome. And in the end, if the questions are long, then I try to answer them later on. So today we're going to talk about I will talk you through the different kind of listening and perception of audio first of all. Then about psychology, how music or sound can make us feel and why. I will talk you through the different kind of audio in games and how the signification works. Basically, it's the mechanics behind the meaning. And later, and in the end, maybe I can also tell you about composition. So, how to use notes, which you probably now know how to generate, because last week there was a lecture about creating audio, and now maybe a more conceptual one about using it. So about me, I like music, I like sound design. I've been doing this for 8 to 10 years. Last 2 years I'm more into game audio and making specific audio to games. I study semiotics, and it is basically the science of meaning making and meaning, and I use semiotics to analyze and attach custom meaning to custom audio. Basically, it helps me to decode the message. For example, if I want to create sad music, then semiotics helps me to understand what is sadness in music, what is music, and then how to generate the sadness, for example. And my master thesis is about soundscapes and modeling reality through and with audible information. So, all those fancy words, audio, music and sound. I guess I have to explain what I mean if I say audio and music and sound. Everything we hear is basically a change in air pressure occurring over time. It means that to hear or to be therefore to be sound, there has to be time, because sound and music, it's not static, it needs time. Change in air pressure means that every time we hear something, something has produced this sound, and we can hear it because sound waves travel through the air and change it. And in the context of this lecture, audio is information unit. We use it to tell something. We use it to give some kind of information, to indicate or to illustrate. And in games, well, nowadays we have also virtual reality, but in the past we mainly had two senses which helped us to experience the game. These are visual and auditory senses. We can hear stuff and we can see stuff, and that's how we experience the game. And most of the time audio is on the hierarchical level a bit lower than visual. It means that if we see something and we hear something, we get more information through seeing something, and therefore we take visual information more dominating and determining our experience. And this is one very cool mechanics of the game audio. We can, every time we use some kind of audio, the audience, the player, takes it somewhat for granted. It means that, for example, when we see a movie and we see, for example, a horse running around, and we hear the specific noise, we take it for granted as it is produced by the horse, but actually it usually is made with some props, for example, coconuts. And so the hierarchy in the audiovisual experience, although it makes the audible a little bit less impactful, the audible still, although it fulfills some kind of 40 to 20% ratio, it can alter and change the experience quite completely. And how we usually use the audio, we use it to create something or break something, the atmosphere. We can use it to mark event, we can use it to emphasize something, to trigger some emotions, and so on. But about that later on. And usually what makes a good audio is that the good audio is unnoticeable. If we start to hear some kind of errors and so on, it well, it means that if the audio is really good, we usually don't notice it because it's well balanced, it's in the game, and it supports everything else. But if we start to if we're starting to take our attention away from other things, it could be faulty. Good audio creates immersiveness, it creates authentic scenery, it supports the visual in every manner. It creates details, it gives a character, for example, it personalizes characters, intonation and so on. And also it helps to emotionally invest to game, to events, to characters by creating these emotions when we hear it. And also good audio complements game mechanics. For example, it indicates an event or creates a suitable atmosphere. It's a healthy balance between simple and complex, because it's very hard thing to make something look very simple and effective. So we might now have a better overview what's audio. And sound and music, and the two brothers. Sound basically is to my view, it's the building blocks of any music and audio. It's kind of what music is made from. Music differs from sound as it is usually. It usually has some kind of structure or architecture inside. And basically, it's the matter of human agency and the difference. What I mean is that usually sound is pretty random, music is structured. Sound can be footstep, music usually is not the footstep. It accompanies some kind of instruments and rhythm and timbre and so on. So, how do we hear things and why? About listening. I present now two different viewpoints on the listening and different kind of listening modes. First one is Pierre Schaeffer I don't know if I pronounce it correctly, but I try. And as his works are mostly in French, I had to find a translated book, and it was translated by Michael Sheehan, who mostly contributed on the scientific side by translating and commenting and further developing Schaffer's views. So in a nutshell, casual listening is the type of listening when you identify the sound source and you relate to it and you relate to the sound by its basic characteristics. You observe the directionality and loudness and these kind of on the surface level parameters. And what you get from casual listening is the source of the sound. For example, you can find out that the footsteps are coming from the left and going to the right, and you can get that the footsteps are far away or near. Next listening mode is semantic listening. It's related to the speech. Basically, it means that you listen and you try to understand the words, if there are any, and messages decoded to those words. Basically, it's a dialogue. And if you are listening to someone talking, for example, you're listening to me right now, it's semantic listening. And the last one is reduced listening, which, on the contrary, with the casual listening, you try to listen to the sound itself. You try to listen those footsteps without any cultural or other context. You isolate those footsteps on their own, and you listen to sound as it is. And it's kind of technical listening. Most of the time, the sound technicians, use the reduced listening when they're, for example, when the normal people is listening music, he might be listening words or maybe melodies or rhythm patterns, but when a sound engineer, for example, listens to some kind of music, he listens to the balance of the instruments or the master or anything else. So, and every time I talk about this, the main point is where is the focus right now. What I mean is that the focus shifts constantly. If we it means that by any moment we can use those listening modes together or separately. Next viewpoint is William Moylan, who adds to this three also critical listening and analytical listening. Critical listening helps you to critically evaluate what you are currently listening. It focuses on isolating different qualities and evaluating them without contextualization. It's a little bit similar to the reduced listening, but it's more music focused. So when you critically listen some piece of music, you put your focus on for example, what instruments are there, what are the scales or melodies. And analytical listening helps to comprehend the relationships between sounds and their sources and the whole piece, also related to music. And also there are active listening and passive listening. Active listening is when you pay attention, and passive is when you don't. And any moment we can use several modes together or separately, and we constantly change our perspective with the sound sources and with the sounds surrounding us. If we hear something interesting, we put our focus there, and passive listening becomes active, and so on. So we listen on different layers, and it all depends on our motivation. Audible world is basically made up from sounds, speech, and music. So now let's examine different game audio categories. Let's see different hierarchies and functions, and try to incorporate it with different listening modes. So first of all, in-game audio is basically, there are two kinds of it. One which we hear and the player hears, and the other is which only we hear. It's diegetic and non-diegetic. Diegetic audio is the one we both hear, and non-diegetic is the one only we hear. And the characters inside the games, they do not hear it. And let's start with the basics. First of all, on the surface level of every audio there is a room tone, usually. Room tone is basically what we hear here right now if I shut up. So it's the drone of the projector, it's some kind of subtle noises. And we need it, because without it the audio is usually quite sterile and too clean. It's kind of the healthy amount of noise we need to perceive the music as natural, and it's the room tone. In the film industries they use it when recording the dialogue or any other aspects. So the diegetic and non-diegetic backgrounds, these are the background music or ambience. To me is that kind of mood creator. It can be music, but it doesn't have to be music, but it's mostly on the background and not on our focus, not in our focus. And again, diegetic background is the audio which we can hear and the characters also hear. It can be the nature, the birds, the jungle noises. And non-diegetic background can be the music, for example. It's logical, because if you put yourself in the game, I guess you won't think that every action of yours could be accompanied by some music. Going to the bus, it doesn't have any theme, and so on. And let's see some examples about diegetic backgrounds. Well, as you can hear, nothing is really happening, but it's the atmosphere of the classroom. It's the ventilator. It's some kind of little breaths here and there, some noises on the table, and so on. Oh, that's our.
That's our background.
And some non-diegetic background could be, for example, this dark space ambience, which creates the mood of isolation and atmosphere of the space, which is empty and creepy. This is another example of non-diegetic background. It's a soundtrack, it creates atmosphere, it creates a mood, but it's definitely not what the characters hear in the game. It's just for us, for the player. Yeah, you get the point. The diegetic, non-diegetic background could be any music. It's just there for the player to hint some kind of scenery or setting. Next one is theme song. It's more specific. And it differs from the background music because it's usually connected with some kind of game stages, for example. Using different soundtracks during fight stages or adventure stages can help us to get more immersive experience. It also can identify characters. What I mean is that usually sometimes there are specific character-based soundtracks which, for example, start to play every time specific character is picked or enters the scene. Good example is, for example, the game League of Legends. Every champion there has a specific theme song. It's somehow connected to the champion and should identify the specific champion. And again, it's only for player, unless it's played from in-game item, for example a radio, like there is one in Metal Gear Solid. So how do they work? Theme songs work, and also the audio and sounds in general, they work on a simple mechanic, which is which we learn from the culture without noticing it. It also works strongly on cliches and conventions and psychology and visually guided associations. It's the same thing I mentioned before. It's the connection we make between visual and audible information, and we take it for granted. If we see something and we hear something, we automatically connect those two things and start to associate them. So a good example of theme songs which identify game stages are the ones I found from Heroes of Might and Magic. So let's have a listen of the first one. Yeah. I hope you all know it. Old classic. And another one is then the war theme. Yeah, game is completely different with those two soundtracks. And as I mentioned before, the League of Legends, every character there has a specific theme song, and we can hear them also. Do you know League of Legends, or is it completely something weird and unfamiliar?
I think everybody knows.
I think everybody knows, yeah.
Good. So why I picked League of Legends is the reason that as the champions there are divided into classes and they have their different roles. The soundtrack should emphasize on identifying them, but as I listened to these soundtracks, they're pretty much the same. It's a good example of how the audio could have been used better, as we see Xerath is to me pretty pure mage, and Xin Zhao is pure fighter, so these are offensive classes, but somehow different from melee to mage and so on. And if we listen to the Xin Zhao theme, I would have, yeah, I would have switched them or did something completely different, but that's not important. Important is that LOL is a very good example of the way to use theme songs to identify the characters. And they do it also in animations in the movies. Every time a specific character enters, there could be a specific theme song even before to hint that the character will be there soon, or some kind of event will be there. So next stage is SFX. It's sound effects, which when before we talked about music, sound effects, it's sound. It's a more smaller piece of audio which mainly contextualize, indicate or illustrate something. When I say contextualize, I mean that if we hear, if we see jungle, we need some kind of jungle noises, and these are tigers or parrots or monkeys or whatever. If we use wrong birds, for example, in the jungle, then the jungle is not believable. It's wrong. So SFX can be and must be used to emphasize the context the game is taking place. Indication is when you use sound effect to hint some kind of event, for example the health bar dropping or whatever. So you don't have to make the player constantly watch your health bar, but you can attach some kind of sound to it to indicate that something is happening and the player should pay attention. And to illustrate, well, with sound effects we can illustrate the objects, the interactions between objects and the player. If we put some kind of noise to picking up an object action, it's more there, it's marked, and it's well, in the game context we can differ important actions from unimportant actions with SFX. And if we use many different discrete sound units, sound effects, we can build the whole soundscapes. These can be used there again to create an atmosphere, to make a suitable background. And SFX is also Foley. Foley is the sound coming from whatever interaction. If the footsteps are a good example of Foley. Foley was first introduced to TV when they started to reproduce technically the sounds on screen. And the father of this is Jack Foley. And again, some examples. Again, diegetic sound effects might be footsteps, which can be heard now. The trick here is that these don't have to be real footsteps. These can be synthesized with the computer or can be produced with any other objects. When we listen to these footsteps isolated, we can start questioning it, but if we see something walking, someone walking, we usually take it for granted. That's how it works. That's the magic of sound design. Again, it sounds a little bit like leaves, but it should be some kind of clothes rustling to each other. And a good example of non-diegetic night vision sound effect. It could be diegetic, but only on that condition when you think that putting on some binoculars would sound like this. In real life, binoculars don't make such noises, so that's why I think it's non-diegetic. It's only for the player to hint something is happening. A good example. Next one is voiceover. Also two kind of audio there. Narration, which could be, which mostly is non-diegetic, as the player, as it's meant for the player. It's meant to tell the story or comment players' actions, but it's usually non-hearable for the character. And the dialogue, which is held between two characters, can be, of course, heard by the characters also, which makes it diegetic. Next one is user interface sounds. Strictly non-diegetic, as they are mostly occurring in the menus or similar activities. Let's hear some of those. So you see what I mean. This is the action, for example, and this is the sound. These are completely conventional, so we have to have some kind of agreement that because these noises are completely random usually, but as we have some kind of action on the screen, there will be an agreement that okay, the decline sounds like this, the yes sounds like that. So in games we usually have diegetic and non-diegetic audio. It's structurized as theme songs, as background music, as sound effects and user interface and voiceovers. And why I talk about this is that we need to some kind of have an overview on different kinds of sounds to grasp them, to get the better material to analyze them, to make ourselves better audio. And again, together with visuals, the audio can indicate something, illustrate something, represent something, and contextualize. Yeah. So next step is the process of signification. It basically means the mechanics of the meaning behind audio. It means that we somehow know what the audio means, and I try to deconstruct it now. There are also two kind of meanings usually. One meaning is straightforward; it's hard-coded to the sign audio, for example, and then another one is additional. What I mean is, for example, we take this binocular sound we heard before. A straightforward meaning is that there are something happening in the game. There is some item being used, or some ability is enabled. Additional meaning, the connotative aspect is more symbolical. Well, binoculars was a bad idea. Let's take another one. Let's take another one. If we hear children playing and laughing, the straightforward meaning is that there are somewhere some kind of children. They are doing something. But the connotative aspect is for example, the side that if we present this laughing children, we can also mean to construct happiness through it, as we associate laughing with happiness. So on the symbolic level, we might want to say happiness, but we use a sign, children laughing. Yeah, so audio can always represent something directly and symbolically. About one more listening mode, which I forgot before, was acousmatic listening. It's kind of tricky one, because there we hear something, but we don't see it. We don't know where the sound is coming from, and so we have to use our imagination. So if we this technique is also used in horror movies and in other movies, when the director wants to use the audience's imagination against the audience. For example, no monster is being shown, but some monster noises are being produced, and we have to imagine our own monster, which is usually a creepier one we could show on the screen. So on the symbolic level, it uses our imagination at any point, and direct level it uses the localization. It only gives us the depending on the level of our perspective, we can get two images. So let's continue with localization. We can use audio to say something about two things. Most likely, we can say something about the room. How big is the room? And we can say something about sound source. Where is it? And we can use 3 dimensions of the room. By manipulating some kind of parameters in the audio, we can say whether the sound is coming from right, from above or below or far or near. So to use or to indicate the room, we can use simple parameters as volume, panning, and tonal characteristics. If we use high volume, loud volume, the sound is mostly perceived as being closer. If we use softer volume, the object is perceived to be more far. With the width, it goes left and right, so we can already put our object far near left or right. And with height, it's also a tricky one. We can hint the verticality. Verticality also, why we perceive or why we associate verticality with sound. It's also conventional. We have some kind of agreement for that, but it comes for two reasons. One is culturally learned facts. Second is psychology, and the third one is our practical experience. For example, our bodies resonate to different frequencies differently, so that's one explanation why we associate lower frequencies to lower verticality. Another one is culturally learned facts, that we have words to describe audio as being high or low. And the third one is the more secondary aspect, the position of speakers. Typically the speakers are placed like that. We have subwoofers on the ground and tweeters above them. So it's a big combination of several things. And the reverb, it's just big room or tiny room. It means that if we, well, reverb as itself, it is the time which is required for the sound to disappear completely. Picture yourself in a church, picture yourself in the toilet. If you make a clap, it disappears either longer or within shorter time. Okay, about our next topic is anaphones, which are basically musical analogies. These are the related to compositional techniques used to create specific message, using specific instruments, using specific melodies, create specific message. A good example is a piece by Richard Strauss, also Sprach Zarathustra, which is by many interpreted as a sunrise, although it has nothing to do with sunrise, but somehow people interpret things similarly. I will talk later on about compositional techniques to achieve specific emotion, but that's related to using either major chords or minor chords or other tools. So About the characteristics of the and parameters of the audio we can use, these are mainly three of them: pitch, timbre, and rhythm. These are the components of music, every piece of music, and used to create several different emotions or messages. I found a good book by Theo van Leeuwen, written in '99, where he described different ways to use pitch, and I will demonstrate it right away. So pitch is the verticality. Pitch means whether the note is high or low, and if we examine pitch, we can see that it can have the movement of it can have amplitude, level, range, and movement itself. They all can be used to depict some kind of different non-musical aspects. What I mean is the way to use music to say something non-musical, basically. Let's see. For example, the range of the pitch realizes the physical size. If we hear something, if we hear a sound which is low, it's connected to our psychology. We usually perceive it as to be larger. If we hear something high, we perceive it to be smaller. This relies strongly on cliches. For example, well, I don't have to bring any example. You can definitely bring your own. Picture some random animation by Disney or Pixar or anything. Big characters. Well, next time you see some kind of animation, pay attention. Big characters always have low noises, low voices, and that's because it indicates or depicts the physical size, the range. The movement of the pitch, it realizes the activation. The more it rises and the more active is the participant or the object producing the sound or the music. If the movement is pretty narrow, if the pitch doesn't move, for example, our Estonian or Finnish intonation, which is not moving so much by its pitch, may be interpreted as emotionally not so active, phlegmatic. So the level realizes the assertiveness or the dominance. Loudness makes the words, the music, the object more dominant and more present. Softness, on the contrary, indicates the intimacy. Also, these concepts of dominance and assertiveness are related to male and female. Male and female instruments, for example, sound differently and are, well, softer instruments are by many perceived as female and louder instruments as male. And men stereotypically have louder noises versus females with softer voices. And the range, no, not the range, but the range. So how high or low means how big or small the object is, how much the pitch moves means how active the thing is, how high or low is the amplitude, realized emotional extension. It means that the more the pitch range increases, the more there is room for emotional expression. It means that picture conversation in that context. If someone is talking with very loud voice, the pitch is constantly going up and down. We can already indicate, read out that the part of that the person is very excited. On the other hand, if we have a response which is soft, the pitch is not moving, then we can read out that the person is maybe bored, or so. These are the four main components that can be used to analyze, for example, conversation, but on the other hand, to create certain kind of message within music or sound. So in combination, the range, the level, the movement, and other parameters help us to depict the actions and qualities of people, places, things, and so on. By manipulating these parameters together, we can express certain qualities. Conversation is a good way to start, but also we can transport these concepts to music, to sound effects, to whatever. If we want to hint something is really important, then we might use more loud level, more movement, and so on. For example, it could sound a little bit hectic, but let's try to illustrate it. Let's try to see and hear how does this towering creature sound.
Are you gonna give me udders? This codpiece gives me tender loins. Name's T-Bone. Chop T-Bone.
Well, so its voice, it's really low. It indicates that the creature is big. He's speaking. It has these snorkeling and animal-like features in the sound, indicating the non-human origins and the animal-like behavior and existence. Also, don't mind the fake language. It was English, but yeah. So he spoke pretty fast, and the pitch wasn't moving really much up and down. So we can already see that kind of persona it created together, these parameters. So in summary of signification process, by using sounds we can tell something about the room, we can tell something about the sound source, we can tell and by manipulating with different properties we can use our meaning to we can shift our meaning. So first of all we have to know what the meaning is, and then use those properties to achieve it. Meanings are direct or indirect, and sounds can either symbolize or have direct meaning in them. So let's go to composition. I want to teach you something practical as well. So let's see here. It's a piano keyboard. Is it unfamiliar to someone? Basically, every key here, black or white, makes some kind of sound. Yeah, and now I will tell you a big secret. How Hollywood and all the other composers use pure math to make music. So let's try, and then again I will illustrate it later on. First of all, root note. It's the note, the basic note, the beginning note. Well, okay. Minor and major chord. These are basically happy chord and sad chord. Two kind of main chords we hear all the time in the music. And to make whatever minor or major chord, we have to know two things: how to find the note and how to count to 3 and to 4. That's basically it. And I will show it. If you want to make a major chord from whatever key here, first of all you have to count to 4 starting from the next key you picked. For example, this is 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, and again 1, 2, 3. This is the major chord, and same goes to minor chord. It's the theory behind it. Well, it works every time in every key, as you see. It's completely universal rule. And how to use it? Only the minor and major chord to create some kind of emotion. You have to, again, find the root note. Either build the major chord, then count to 2, and construct another major chord. I will show you. This guy talks it way better than me.
If you like it.
Yeah. So by using only 2 chords, we can not only show some kind of emotion, but specific theme and more symbolical and complex things like evil or good or wonder or anything else. And it's really cool and it's really simple actually.
How universal it is? Is it culturally sensitive or it's sort of psychological universal for everybody, or is it only Western culture that can sense those chords?
It's purely Western, yeah, because Eastern.
In China, it's different. Or?
Yeah, of course, because first of all, it's Western notation. We have in Western we have this kind of keyboard. In China, the keyboard is different. Mm-hmm. So and the mechanics behind the music is also different. Yeah, so it's very good remark. It mostly works in Western, but I would say as the situation is pretty global right now, that Chinese could also understand, but maybe not so easily these concepts, as we have had this kind of compositional techniques not so long also, because in the Middle times, in the Renaissance, in the Baroque times, these concepts were not used. It's a new thing, but maybe if century goes on, it could be worldwide. I don't know. Yeah, so very good remark about learned associations. If I now talk about emotions, it's one of the four things which gives us the emotion from the music. So as you can see, these are the main emotions. There are many more, but the main and more simple ones, which could quite easily be translated to music. And how they usually do it is by, as mentioned before, learned associations. We already kind of know that minor chord is sad, although the newborn kids do not know the minor chord is sad. We know it because we have, through our lives, we have, every time we hear it, it's the sad context. Through the learned associations, we also have another aspect, which is musical expectations. It's also connected to the learning aspect. As we grow up, we experience a lot of music, and we start to create and recognize some patterns. And we hear a chord, a note, we subconsciously always expect something to come next, and it's based on our past experience. Expressive emotional movement, it's related to the thing I talked with pitch. It's the kind of physical movement and the properties of notes which are also associated to kind of activeness or passiveness and so on. And let's see. Nothing more. Yeah, and a little bit about composition more. In Western composition, they use mostly three things: tension and release, contrast, and repeat. If we make some kind of music, if we want it to be remembered, we have to have all of these aspects. If we want it to be effective, we have to have all of these aspects. Human brain remembers better those things which are repeated. Contrast makes us kind of notice things, as we cannot know what is music without knowing what is silence and so on. In the music, contrast is also often used to mark and indicate. For example, before big culmination, there has to be a silent part, there has to be a build up. Otherwise the climax doesn't feel like the climax, and so on. And tension release is also this kind of basic compositional technique, which is used to either capture our attention or let it go in the specific parts. And it also guides and helps our attention. So what more? Oh, so yeah, what I want you to get from this lecture is that there are many different modes of listening, many different things you can do with audio, but it all requires one thing. You have to know your message. You have to know whether your music or your game, your character is sad or adventurous or anything, and then you can start building the audio around it to support, to illustrate, or to enhance the character, the event, or the game. Yeah, so that's for now. That's for now.